Since you're taking this course, you're probably interested in computers in general. And at some point in your life, you might have wondered how the internet works. When I type in an address in my browser, how does quote-unquote the internet know which website to display? Now, you might have heard of this term called an IP address, which is, loosely speaking, a numeric sequence associated with every device, computer, and server. One of the first things that a browser does when you enter a web address is it looks up the corresponding IP address. For example, this number over here, this corresponds to one of the many servers that Google has. But what we're going to do today is not that related to the internet. All we're going to do is write a function which takes in some string argument and determines whether it's a valid IP address or not. And you can see that I've created this function header for isIPaddress, which takes in a string and outputs a Boolean, and that Boolean is true if and only if the address contains only digits and periods. If I call isIPaddress on, say, 256.14.125.1, this returns true because each character in the string is either a number or a period. But if I call isIPaddress on, say, 40 St. George Street, then this returns false. Because even though it does have some characters, which are digits, like the 4 and the 0, and it has a character that's a period as well, it also has characters, which are certainly not digits or periods. And my function is checking whether all of the characters are digits and periods. So we're going to do this by practicing what we learned and looping through a string. Intuitively, we're going to do the following. We're going to loop through the string and check each character one at a time. So down here, I'm going to check the 4, and then the 0, and then the space. And for each character in the string, I'm going to check whether that character is a digit or period or not. So let's try doing that. For, say, character in address, we're going to check whether that character is a digit or period. And we can do that quite elegantly by just checking if the character in question is in this string. And notice that this string here contains all of the digits, 0 through 9, and a period. So if the character is in this string, it has to be a digit or period. And if it's not in the string, then it's not a digit or period. Now it turns out here, if it's not a digit or period, I know what to do right away. Let's say I've gotten to this space over here. This is not a digit or period. And so I know that the address doesn't contain only digits and periods. So I can return false right away. If the character is not in this string, then I can return false. And now what if it is a digit or period? Maybe I'll just try to do some symmetry and say else return true. Let's try this and see what happens. If I take my first example here, all of the characters are digits and periods, so this should return true, and it does. Great. And now let's take this string over here, where there's a mixture of digits and non-digits. This should return false, but it returns true. And why is that? Basically, the problem is that we returned true way too early. If you think about what's happening in this if block here, these 4 lines together say, if something happens, return false, otherwise return true. But in either case, we're going to return something. And that means that even though this looks like it's inside the body of a loop, and so you might expect it to loop through every character in the string, it actually doesn't. And let me illustrate that with an example. I'll print checking and then the character. And if we try to run this code on this bad example, we see that only the first character was checked. Because right after we print this line, we ask, is the character not in the string? In this case, it is in the string because 4 is right here. So we go to this else block and return true. And that's it, the function stops. The point that I'm trying to make is that we shouldn't be treating the true and false cases in the same way here. For this function is IP address to return false, all we need is a single character to not be a digit or period. On the other hand, for this function to return true, we need to make sure all of the characters are digits and periods. And what that means for our code is if the character is a digit or period, we don't want to return true yet. We really just want to move on to the next character because we still need to check all of the other characters. Okay, but when am I supposed to return true? Because I know that sometimes I should return true. I should return true only after every character in the string has been checked. That is, I should return true over here. Now, why does this work? Why don't I need to do any extra calculation down here? It's because the only way the loop will finish completely without returning false in the middle is if every character is a digit or period. The very first time there's a non-digit, non-period character, this loop will stop and return false. So let's try running that. Checking this out. Returned true, and notice that I checked every single character in the original string. And now let's check this one. And notice that it returned false correctly, but it actually didn't check every single character. It only checked up to the very first non-digit, non-period character, which was the space. So please keep this in mind in the future, because writing an else block here, because you're trying to be symmetric with return false, return true, that's an extremely common mistake that students make. And the really key thing that you need to think about as you're writing functions like this, which loop over strings and later loop over lists, is there's a very important difference between requiring some property or condition for every character in the string versus requiring some condition to hold just for one character in the string.